Good evening and welcome back to Sports Talk ATL. I am Chase Earl, joined by Alex Lord. A lot to talk about today. We're going to start off the show with Andruw Jones being snubbed from the Hall of Fame. Again, that's not necessarily a surprise. He still has a few more times to get in, but at this point, he should already be in. Jim Harbaugh to the Chargers. There's a report that a deal is close, but it didn't happen. It was supposed to happen, or it was expected to happen last night. Falcons might have an interview with him today. We'll see what happens there. Potential NFL draft prospects. And we're going to talk about Raheem Morris, who is the second coach to finish his second interview with the Atlanta Falcons. But starting off with Andruw Jones, the MLB Hall of Fame was announced yesterday. There were three players that were elected. It was Joe Mauer, Adrian Beltre, and Todd Helton. I think all those players are deserving, but Andruw Jones, now his seventh year on the ballot, falls about 13% short of the 75% threshold. He was up 3% from last year. He has three more times. Usually on those last 2-3 times, you see some bigger increases, 5, 6, 10% sometimes. So I do expect Andruw Jones to get in, but the fact that he's not in is really ridiculous. Listen, here's a couple things that I want to say about it. One, if you are the best player in the history of the game at a certain aspect of the game, how are you not a Hall of Fame? You got a guy like Ozzie Smith, who's regarded as the best defensive shortstop of all time. He's in the Hall of Fame. Now, but Andruw Jones, who also hit 434 homers, he's not just a defensive player. He's by far the best defensive center fielder of all time. On top of that, for a decade, he was the third most valuable player in the entire league, behind Barry Bonds and Alex Rodriguez, two guys that were in the heart of the steroid scandal. You could argue he was the best player for a decade in the game that was clean. It's absurd. And the whole process, it's never going to be fixed. So I'm not going to complain about it too much. They're never going to fix the process, but the guy needs to be in the Hall of Fame, and the baseball writers and their gatekeeping of guys in the Hall of Fame has just gotten absolutely absurd.
Yeah, they're absolutely dorks. I saw John Heyman. I'm forgetting what specific player he was talking about that he didn't vote for, but wanted to see get into the Hall of Fame. That right there shows you all you need to know about what the process is like getting baseball players into the Hall of Fame. It's an absolute joke. It's a travesty, really. And I think that you could take it a step further and say that it's the biggest flawed Hall of Fame of the major four sports: hockey, football, basketball. You go to any of those sports, like Chase just said, the best special teamer of all time in the NFL is going to be in the Hall of Fame. Like Devin Hester is going to get into the Hall of Fame eventually. Cordero Patterson, who had a very forgettable NFL career, is going to have a shot getting into the NFL just because he tied the record for the most touchdown kickoff returns. If you can't write the story of baseball, football, whatever sport you're talking about without said player, and I think that's true with Andruw Jones speaking about the greatest defensive center fielder of all time, however many gold gloves he had in a row during that 10-year span, then he should be in the Hall of Fame. That should answer your question, regardless of what his career tailed off to be. When he was at his best, you cannot write the story of baseball without him, and that should be your answer. I think it's that simple.
Yeah, I mean, 10 straight gold gloves. And as I said, it's not just defensive prowess. I mean, for 10 years, he was the best defensive player in the entire baseball. You could argue he's the best defensive player ever, not just center fielder. He's the best defensive outfielder. He might be the best defensive player to ever play in the history of the game. And on top of that, he hit 434 home runs, most all of which came over a 10-year span. I mean, we're literally talking about a guy who's up there with A-Rod and Barry Bonds. And the only two reasons those guys aren't in the Hall of Fame is because of steroids. Those are two, if you take steroids out of it, two of the best players to ever play the game. They're two top 10 players. I mean, you're talking about two guys with more than 700 home runs. That's who he was along with for a decade. And I understand his career fell off. But hypothetically, right, Andruw Jones retires after that 10-year stretch and doesn't go on and have a bad stretch of 6 years to end his career. He's already in the Hall of Fame. He's a first ballot Hall of Famer. So just because he had those bad 6 years, he is not getting in he's not already in. But if he had retired after those 10 years, he'd be in. Think about Joe Mauer, right? Retired early. He has 7 less career WAR than Andruw Jones. He was a first ballot Hall of Famer. He was a first ballot Hall of Famer. Right when he started going on the downside, he just said, hey, I've had a good enough career, whatever. first ballot Hall of Famer. Like Joe Mauer is not a better player than Andruw Jones, and he was a first ballot Hall of Famer. And there's so many examples of guys in the Hall of Fame that were not nearly as good as Andruw Jones. And he's going to get in. I would be shocked if he doesn't get in. But if he doesn't, it's a travesty. And it's a shame to baseball. And it's ridiculous. And it's just a show. But the guy that you're talking about, Heyman, was Billy Wagner. He finished 5 votes short. If you're going to let relievers into the Hall of Fame, like I understand their WAR is not going to be as high as some of the other guys. You got to let in Billy Wagner. I mean, this guy was 38 years old playing for the Atlanta Braves and kind of his send-off. He had a 1.43 RA as their closer in 71 appearances and a 13.5 K9.
Heyman said, I'm glad my vote wasn't the deciding factor. Like Chase said, 5 or so votes short. John Heyman, who is one of the big 4 or 5 guys in baseball in terms of reporting, said that I'm glad my vote didn't keep him from getting in because I think he should get in. What are we doing here, guys? Did you just hear yourself talk? Do you read your tweets before you send them off? That's one of the most idiotic statements I've ever seen in my entire life. I mean, just absolutely low IQ, boneheaded stuff. I obviously I'm riled up about the Andruw Jones thing, but I think this process, and I do the same song and dance every year. We did it last year with Andruw Jones. We did it the year before. The fact of the matter is this process, I know you said it's not going to change. I can't complain about it. I'm going to complain about it. It's absolute bull, you know what? I mean, it's absolutely crazy that some of these guys feel like they're the gatekeepers of America's pastime. Grow up. You're not that big of a deal.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. And then you can even go a step further. I mean, a lot of guys had Billy Wagner on their ballot last year and then don't have him on this year. I mean, what changed? Like, the guy has been retired. Like, did you just have were you just like really having a tough time sleeping knowing that you put Billy Wagner into the Hall of Fame last year? I mean, it's almost like, I don't know. It's really hard to explain, and I don't understand what a lot of these voters think. And I think some of these voters should get stripped. But as I said, it's not going to change. It's been this way for years. They've been gatekeeping the MLB Hall of Fame. Another guy that didn't get in, that was a former Braves player, Gary Sheffield. He's now off the ballot. Obviously, there's these different committees that could change that. But his thing was more about steroid usage, and we could get into the whole steroid conversation, whether some guys belong in and who doesn't. I don't know if they're ever going to let those guys in. It certainly doesn't seem so. Clemens didn't get in. Barry Bonds doesn't look like he's getting in. A-Rod doesn't look like he's getting in. But it's disappointing for Andruw Jones. That is for sure. Coming up after the break, Jim Harbaugh to the Chargers. It looks like a deal is coming to fruition. What does that mean for the Atlanta Falcons?